The midday sun hung high above the prairie, beating down on the dust-choked street of Dry Creek Junction. Wagons rattled over uneven boards, horses stamped impatient hooves, and traders hollered over one another, trying to strike deals before. The day grew hotter. Folks milled about the wooden storefronts, their shadows stretching thin across the ground. It looked like any ordinary town gathering, but the air carried an edge that told every watchful soul something was brewing. Sometimes trouble didn't announce itself with gunfire or shouting, it whispered first, and everyone in Dry Creek knew to listen close when that happened. Near the edge of the crowd, a young girl stood awkwardly, her dress torn at the hem and her eyes darting like a wild bird. Dust streaked her face, and though she looked out of place, the people nearby kept their distance. Some stared, some turned away, and a few muttered under their breath. She wasn't from around here, that much was plain. There was a strange stillness in her posture, as if she were bracing herself for something no one else could see. She hugged her arms close, shifting from one bare foot to the other, while the crowd sized her up the way ranchers might size up cattle at auction. A sharp voice cut through the murmurs. "Step aside, sheriff's business." The lawman of Dry Creek broad-shouldered, mustache stiff with sweat pushed forward. His boots struck the ground with practiced authority, and the crowd parted enough to give him room. His eyes landed on the girl, narrowing with suspicion. She didn't flinch. She just stared back at him, quiet, steady. There was something in her gaze that unsettled him, though he wouldn't admit it to anyone standing there just then. From across the street, a lone rancher leaned against a hitching post. He was tall, sunburnt, his coat frayed from years of wear, and his hat shadowed eyes that had seen too much trail dust and blood. Nobody knew him well. He came and went as he pleased, never lingering in town longer than he had to. Folks called him stubborn, hard as barbed wire, the kind who spoke little and watched everything. That morning, he'd only meant to trade for supplies, but his eyes caught sight of the girl before the sheriff reached her. Something about her froze him in place. Her posture, her stillness, he'd seen it before. And then, as she shifted, a ragged sleeve slipped just enough to reveal the edge of a dark marking burned into her skin. The crowd hadn't noticed it yet, but he had a tattoo. Not the kind sailors wore, not the decorative kind folks whispered about from the cities, but a symbol. A brand. His stomach knotted. He knew that mark. The sheriff stopped in front of the girl. "You lost?" he asked, his tone sharp but measured. She didn't answer. The silence thickened. People leaned closer, eager for spectacle. The rancher's voice rang out before the sheriff pressed her further. "Stop." His boots struck the boards as he strode forward, the crowd instinctively shifting aside for him. Dust clung to his coat. His spurs chimed with each step, and his presence turned heads without effort. He stopped between the girl and the sheriff, his voice low but firm. "I'll buy her." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The words sounded reckless, harsh even, but there was weight behind them. The sheriff turned, bristling. "You'll..." "What?" The rancher ignored the challenge, his eyes never leaving the girl. "That girl looks strange, but I recognize that tattoo." His tone carried something unshakable, something personal, like a memory that refused to fade. He wasn't making a bargain. He was making a claim. The girl finally blinked, her lips parting slightly as if she knew he spoke truth. Her hand instinctively covered the mark, but it was too late. The lone rancher's past had already risen from the dust, staring him dead in the face. The sheriff's hand lingered near his holster, torn between enforcing the law and unraveling what this moment meant. The crowd, restless and buzzing, leaned in as though they could catch answers in the air. And the girl, caught between strangers, held her silence like a shield. The rancher stepped closer,
lowering his voice so only she might hear.
"Where did you get that mark?" Her answer didn't come. Instead, a sudden shout echoed from the far end of the street, drawing every eye away for a heartbeat. Wagons shifted, a horse reared, and in that single moment of chaos, the tension broke into something sharper. When the dust cleared, the girl was no longer where she stood. She had slipped into the crowd, swallowed whole by the restless bodies pressing in. The rancher cursed under his breath, scanning the throng, but she was gone. The sheriff muttered something about outsiders in trouble, but his words blurred into the noise. All the rancher knew was this: he had seen a mark from his past etched into the skin of a stranger, and fate wasn't about to let him walk away from it. He pushed past the murmuring townsfolk, his mind turning like the wheel of a kalakadim wagon barreling downhill. That tattoo meant more than she let on. It wasn't coincidence, not chance. He'd chased shadows of it before, in camps and canyons and forgotten trails. Now it had walked into Dry Creek Junction, carried by a girl no one claimed. Somewhere in that restless crowd, she was running. And somewhere deep inside him, the rancher knew he couldn't let her vanish. Not this time. But as he reached the edge of town, scanning the open road stretching into the wild, a figure leaned against the rail outside the saloon, watching him with eyes sharp as knives. The figure tipped a hat, slow and deliberate, as though mocking him with patience. A smile curled at the corner of a mouth that knew secrets. The rancher froze, a chill running under the burn of the sun. The stranger's eyes flicked toward the road where the girl had gone, then back to him. No words were spoken, but the message was clear: someone else recognized that tattoo too. And they weren't about to let him find her first. The air between them tightened, the weight of old debts and buried truths pressing down on Dry Creek Junction. The crowd carried on behind them, oblivious to the storm gathering. The girl was out there running, her tattoo burning like a signal in the dust. The lone rancher adjusted his hat, jaw clenched, knowing full well what this meant. The past wasn't finished with him, not by a long shot. And somewhere, just beyond sight, the girl's footsteps faltered as another shadow stepped into her path. The rancher's eyes stayed fixed on the stranger outside the saloon. The man's stare was steady, almost lazy, but there was something in it that spoke of unfinished business. The rancher didn't move for a long moment. Dust swirled at his boots and the chatter of the townsfolk blurred into a dull hum, but between the two men, silence carried the weight of a storm about to break. The rancher finally tipped his hat low and turned toward the open road, but he could feel the stranger's eyes on his back as sharp as any knife. Out beyond the town, the land stretched wide and unforgiving. The prairie grass bent in the wind, hiding every trail the girl might have taken. She couldn't have gotten far, not barefoot, not with that worn dress. Still, the rancher knew desperation could carry a soul faster than common sense ever would. He tightened the reins on his horse, swung into the saddle, and let the animal move into a trot. His jaw stayed clenched. He wasn't chasing just a runaway. He was chasing a ghost carved into his memory, a brand he had sworn never to see again. Years ago, out on the borderlands, he had ridden with men who weren't all honest. They carried cattle, supplies, and sometimes worse. He had been younger then, stubborn but green, and he hadn't asked enough questions. That tattoo, he remembered seeing it on others before, the same jagged lines scorched into the skin, carried by faces that vanished in the night. It wasn't a mark of pride, but a mark of ownership, a symbol that tied people to something darker than most townsfolk cared to imagine. He thought he had left it behind. Now it was staring him down on the arm of a girl in Dry Creek. He pushed his horse harder, eyes scanning for prints along the dirt road. The prairie didn't forgive much, but it left traces if you knew where to look. A small heel mark, uneven, then another. She was running blind, heading toward the open fields instead of the cover of the canyon. He slowed, leaning low, following. The faint signs. Every mark in the dust pulled him deeper into questions he hadn't wanted to ask. Who was she? Why here? And most of all, why that tattoo? Back in town, the sheriff watched the rancher ride out, suspicion thick in his gut. He didn't trust drifters, and the rancher was as lone as they came. That talk about buying the girl unsettled the townsfolk and unsettled him too. The sheriff leaned against a post, chewing over the scene, when the stranger from the saloon walked up. His steps were calm, measured, the kind that said he wasn't in a hurry because he already knew what came next. "Friend of yours?" the sheriff asked, nodding toward the trail of dust left by the rancher. The stranger tilted his hat. Not hardly, more like unfinished business. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The sheriff narrowed his gaze. "You know that girl?" The stranger gave a low chuckle. "Let's just say she's carrying something that don't belong to her. And your ranch hand out there, well, he's walking straight into it." The sheriff didn't press further. He'd seen men like this before, the kind who kept their secrets close and their pistols closer. But something about the way he spoke made the sheriff's gut twist. Trouble had already found Dry Creek, and it wasn't finished yet. Out on the trail, the rancher finally spotted her. She was crouched by a stream, cupping water in her hands, her shoulders heaving with exhaustion. Her hair clung damp to her cheeks, and she kept looking over her shoulder as though the whole world was chasing her. When she saw the rancher approach, she stood quickly, fists clenched at her sides. "You followed me," she said, her voice sharp but trembling. "You're hard to miss," he answered, dismounting slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. "I ain't here to hurt you," she shook her head. "You don't know what that mark means." His eyes darkened. "I know enough. I've seen it before. Too many times." She took a step back, her bare feet sinking in the soft earth. Then, "You know I can't stay here. I can't stay anywhere." The rancher studied her, the way fear wrapped around her words like barbed wire. "That mark," he said carefully, "it ties you to someone, doesn't it? Someone dangerous." Her silence was answer enough. She pulled her sleeve down tighter, but the brand still burned in his mind. He wanted to ask more, but the sound of hoofbeats broke through the quiet. Both turned toward the ridge, where dust rose against the sky. "Riders." The girl's face drained of color. "They found me," she whispered. The rancher's hand hovered near his sidearm, though his eyes stayed on her. "Who are they?" "You." "Don't want to know," she said, her voice hollow. "If you get in their way, you'll carry the mark too." The riders crested the ridge, 5 of them, their silhouettes sharp against the horizon. They moved in formation, steady, purposeful, like wolves closing in on prey. The rancher felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the old rhythm of danger he had tried to leave behind. He turned to the girl, but she had already started to run again, splashing through the stream and vanishing into the brush. He swore under his breath, torn between chasing her and bracing for the riders. The choice was stolen when one of the men raised an arm and pointed straight at him. They knew him now. Or maybe they thought he was with her. Either way, the storm had rolled right up to his feet. The riders slowed as they neared their leader. Stepping forward. He was broad, with a scar that cut across his cheek like a brand of its own. His voice was low, carrying across the water. "You seen a girl come this way?" The rancher kept his face unreadable. "Plenty of girls pass through these parts. You'll have to be clearer." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb. She carries a mark, same as us. She don't belong out here alone." The rancher's stomach turned at the words. Same as us. So the tattoo wasn't just a symbol he remembered. It was a bond, a chain that tied people together. He thought of the girl's frightened eyes, the way she covered her arm like it burned her. She wasn't part of them. She was running from them. The leader studied him a moment longer, then spat into the dirt. "If you cross our path again, you'll wish you hadn't." He signaled his men, and the group turned their horses toward the brush, following the girls' trail. The rancher stood still, watching until the dust swallowed them. His hands tightened into fists. He had a choice: ride back to town and forget, or follow them into whatever darkness that Mark carried. He already knew which path he'd take. Back in Dry Creek, whispers spread like wildfire. Folks talked about the girl, the tattoo, the rancher's outburst. Some said she was cursed, others said she was an outlaw, and a few swore she was something worse, something not meant for ordinary folks to understand. The stranger outside the saloon kept listening, his smile never fading. He knew the truth ran deeper, and he was willing to wait for it to surface. As night settled over the plains, the rancher tracked faint hoofprints toward the canyon. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and the moon cast long shadows across the rocks. The air grew colder, but the mark of that tattoo burned hotter in his mind with each mile. He couldn't shake the memory of those he'd seen wearing it before, the way they vanished into smoke and blood. The girl wasn't just running from men. She was running from something bound to her by fire and skin. And somewhere ahead, in the said dark twists of the canyon, her footsteps echoed against stone. She wasn't alone. He could hear the faint voices of the riders closing in, their laughter cruel and sharp. He drew his horse to a stop, hands steady on the reins. Every instinct told him this was more than just another fight, more than just another chase. This was a reckoning, and the mark was the key. The rancher took a slow breath, the night air filling his lungs. Then he nudged his horse forward into the shadows where the girl and her pursuers disappeared, knowing full well that once he stepped into that canyon, there was no turning back. The canyon walls rose high on either side, jagged stone pressing in like the ribs of some ancient beast. The rancher guided his horse carefully along the trail, every sound magnified in the still night. Hooves clicked against rock, the wind moaned low through narrow passages, and above, a sliver of moon spilled faint light onto the path ahead. He kept his ears sharp, knowing the riders were somewhere in the darkness. Their voices had carried earlier, echoing through the canyon bends, and though they'd quieted, he could feel them close. Somewhere deeper inside, the girl moved quickly but clumsily, her bare feet slipping on loose stones. He'd caught glimpses of her tracks, the drag of her heel here, the skid of her toes there. She was desperate, but desperation wasn't enough to outpace men on horseback. The rancher urged his mount forward, faster now, unwilling to let the riders close the distance first. The canyon forked, one path leading upward toward a ridge, the other narrowing into a twisting gully. He dismounted, crouched low, and studied the ground. The faint prints of small feet pressed into the dust of the narrower path. She'd gone into the gully, boxed herself in without realizing it. He cursed under his breath. The riders would trap her easily if they split. He swung back into the saddle and pressed forward. The air grew colder as the canyon tightened, shadows pressing closer with every turn. Then he heard it, her voice, faint but sharp, followed by the cruel laughter of men. He spurred his horse hard, the sound of hooves crashing like thunder against the canyon floor. When he rounded the bend, the scene cut clear through him. The girl had stumbled against the rock wall, cornered, her back pressed to stone. 3 riders had dismounted, circling her like wolves, while the other 2 sat mounted, watching with steady patience. The scarred leader stood closest, his hand gripping a coil of rope. The firelight from a lantern one of them carried danced across the mark on the girl's arm, making it shine like an open wound. "Don't fight, girl," the scarred man said. "You know what happens when you fight." The rancher's voice broke through the canyon, hard as iron. "She's not yours." Every head snapped toward him. The leader's eyes narrowed, recognizing the same stubborn figure who had stood against the sheriff earlier that day. "You again," he growled. "I warned you once." The rancher slid from his horse, boots striking stone. His hand hovered near his revolver, though he didn't draw it yet. "I don't take kindly to chains," he said. "And I sure as hell don't take kindly to branding." The leader spat into the dust. "You think you understand that, Mark? You don't know nothing." The girl's eyes darted between them, fear and hope warring in her face. She didn't speak, but the way she looked at the rancher told him she'd rather stand beside him than fall into their hands. Before either side made a move, the sound of more hooves echoed from the canyon mouth. Another group was coming in. The leader turned his head sharply, confusion flashing across his face. The rancher felt the same tension coil in his chest. Whoever these newcomers were, neither side had been expecting them. Lantern light flickered against the canyon walls as the new riders appeared, 5 more, cloaked in dust, their eyes sharp and unblinking. Their horses moved with precision, their riders silent as the grave. They stopped at a distance, watching the standoff without a word. The scarred leader muttered under his breath, uneasy. "Them again," he said, almost to himself. The rancher caught the words and filed them away. Them again. Whoever these men were, they weren't all eyes. The canyon pulsed with tension. Too many eyes fixed on the girl, too many guns within easy reach. She pressed tighter to the stone, clutching her arm where the mark burned beneath her sleeve. For the first time, the rancher noticed her lips moving in a silent prayer, though whether it was for rescue or forgiveness, he couldn't tell. The newcomers finally spoke. "She belongs to no one," their leader said. His voice was calm but carried like thunder across the stone. "And anyone who claims otherwise will answer to us." The scarred man's jaw tightened. "Stay out of this. You don't know what she carries." The new leader's gaze didn't waver. "We know exactly what she carries. And we know what it will bring." The rancher felt the ground tilt beneath him. He had thought this was about a tattoo, about ownership, about men chasing a runaway. But now, with both sides closing in, it was clear the truth was heavier. The mark wasn't just a brand. It was a key to something larger, something neither. Group wanted to speak aloud. Before another word passed, the girl bolted. She darted through a narrow cut in the canyon wall, a space so slim none of the mounted men could follow. Shouts erupted behind her, and in an instant, both groups turned on each other, each blaming the other for letting her slip away. Gunfire cracked, bullets sparking against stone, the canyon exploding into chaos. The rancher ducked low, his revolver finally drawn, though he didn't fire yet. He had no stake in their feud, not yet. He used the distraction to pull back, mounting his horse again and steering it toward the slim cut the girl had taken Dot as he rode through. The gunfire echoed behind him, screams mixing with the sharp ring of ricochets. The canyon walls swallowed the noise as he pressed deeper into the cut, following the faint shadow of the girl ahead. She stumbled once, nearly falling, but he caught up and steadied her. She looked at him with wide eyes, breathing hard. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. He just guided her forward, away from the chaos. Finally, he said, "Because I've seen that mark before, and every time I did, blood followed. I'm not letting it happen again." Her lips trembled, and for the first time, her voice softened. "Then you know it's not just a mark, it's a curse." The word hung heavy in the narrow canyon, heavier than the smoke of gunpowder behind them. They moved through the cut until it opened into a hidden hollow, moonlight spilling onto grass and stone. For a moment, it felt safe, but both knew safety was a lie. The rancher kept watch, listening for the chase, while the girl sank onto a rock, holding her arm close. "Vale. Never stop," she whispered. Not them, not the others. Both sides want me, and neither for reasons you'd call decent. I didn't choose this." She pulled her sleeve back, revealing the mark fully for the first time. It was jagged dark, burned into her skin with cruel precision, shaped like a broken circle crossed by a single slash. The rancher's stomach turned. He'd seen it carved into stones out on the frontier, drawn into the dirt at abandoned camps, left behind like warnings. He'd never known what it meant, but he'd always known to keep his distance. And now it was burned into flesh. He forced his voice steady. "What does it mean?" Her eyes glistened in the moonlight. "It means I was chosen, not by choice. And it means they won't rest until I'm taken back." Before he could press her further, the sound of approaching footsteps broke through the hollow. Not horses this time, boots on stone. The stranger from the saloon stepped into the moonlight, hat tipped low, smile curling at the corner of his mouth. "Evening," he drawled, as though they were old friends meeting on a porch instead of fugitives in the dark. "You didn't think I'd let you ride out here alone, did you?" The rancher's hand went to his revolver again, but the stranger only raised a hand. Now, I ain't here to start shooting." "Not yet. I just came to talk." His eyes flicked to the girl, sharp and knowing. "That mark of hers, it ain't what you think, but I can tell you what it really means. Question is, do you want to know, or do you want to keep pretending you can outrun it?" The girl stiffened, clutching her arm tighter, as if his words cut deeper than any bullet. The rancher didn't lower his gun. He didn't trust the stranger's smile, but he couldn't deny the weight of his words. He wanted answers. The stranger stepped closer, slow and steady. "She's the key to something bigger than you, bigger than this town, bigger than all of us put together. That's why they're chasing her. That's why they'll kill anyone who stands in the way. And that's why you, my friend, are already in deeper than you can climb out." The hollow went quiet again, the only sound the whisper of wind through dry grass. The rancher's heart beat steady but hard. The girl's eyes shone with terror and defiance. The stranger's smile never wavered, and somewhere, beyond the canyon walls, gunfire still echoed faintly, a reminder that the storm hadn't passed. It was only gathering strength that the stranger's words hung heavy in the hollow, cutting deeper than the chill of night air. The girl's shoulders tensed as though every sound he spoke was a nail driving her back against the rock. The rancher's revolver stayed steady, but his mind was racing. He didn't trust the stranger, not one bit, but he couldn't ignore the way he spoke, as if he knew truths buried long before either of them set foot in Dry Creek. "You've been watching," the rancher said quietly, his voice edged with suspicion that the stranger tipped his hat with a faint smile. "I've been waiting. There's a difference." His eyes flicked again to the girl, lingering on the mark burned into her skin. "That brand's not just a curse, like she thinks. It's a signal. A chain. And right now, there are men on both sides tearing each other apart to be the ones who hold it." The girl shook her head fiercely, her voice cracking. "Don't listen to him. He wants it as much as they do. He's no different." The stranger chuckled low, not denying it. "Difference is, I'm willing to tell the truth. They won't. They'll chain you, bleed you, use you, but they'll never tell you why." His gaze slid back to the rancher. "And I reckon you've seen enough of that mark in your past to know I ain't lying." The rancher's jaw tightened. Memories rose faces in firelight, symbols carved into stone, whispers on trails he'd chosen not to follow. He'd ridden away from it all once, thinking distance meant escape. But now the mark was here again, on a girl's arm, pulling him into the same shadow. The girl's voice broke the silence. "I don't care what it means. I just want it gone. I want them gone." Her hand shook as she clutched at her sleeve. "I can't live with it anymore." Before the rancher could speak, a sharp crack split the night, a gunshot, distant but clear, echoing down the canyon walls. All three froze. The stranger's smile slipped for the first time. There. Moving this way, he muttered. The rancher turned to the girl. We have to go. But the stranger stepped forward, hand raised. Not yet. You run blind and they'll catch you before dawn. You need a plan. You need me. The rancher's revolver shifted slightly, aimed higher now. You need to start proving you're not just another wolf in the pack. The stranger met his stare without flinching. Fair enough. There's a place out past the canyon, an old outpost buried in the cliffs. Built during the wars, forgotten by most. But the men chasing her, they haven't forgotten. They've carved that same mark into the stones there. It's where this all began, and it's where it'll end. His voice dropped, rough with certainty. That's where they're driving her. And if you think you can keep her safe without knowing what waits there, you're a fool. The girl's face drained of color. No, she whispered. Not there, not again. The rancher looked at her sharply. You've been there? She shook her head, trembling. Not inside. But they told me. They said that was where I was. Bound to go when the time came, where the mark would be. Finished. The stranger's smile returned, thin and sharp. Now you see. You can ride away, let her be dragged back into that hole, or you can walk into the fire and find out the truth. Either way, the choice is yours. Another gunshot cracked through the canyon, closer this time. Horses screamed in the distance. The fight between the rival groups was breaking, and one side was winning ground. The rancher felt the walls closing. The weight of the moment pressing on his chest. He holstered his gun but didn't lower his guard. We ride, he said. The girl's eyes darted between him and the stranger. With him? For now, the rancher answered, his voice firm. They moved quickly, slipping out of the hollow and back onto the narrow trail. The stranger led the way, his step sure, as though he had walked these paths 100 times before. The girl stumbled often, her strength failing, but the rancher kept her steady, his grip strong on her arm. The night stretched long, filled with distant shouts, the thunder of hooves, and the low howl of wolves echoing across the plains. Every sound pressed them onward. Every shadow felt like it carried eyes. The girl whispered once, so quiet he barely caught it. Why are you helping me? You don't even know my name. The rancher's reply came rough, but honest. Because once I didn't help. I let others carry that mark, and I walked away. Not this time. Her eyes glistened, but she said no more. By the time the first gray of dawn touched the sky, they reached the ridge the stranger had spoken of. The outpost loomed ahead, carved into the cliffs, its walls half crumbled but still, bearing the faint traces of the symbol etched deep into stone. The circle and slash, the same brand burned into the girl's arm, weathered but unmistakable. The rancher's stomach tightened at the sight. He dismounted slowly, scanning the ground. The place reeked of old smoke and older secrets. The stranger's voice carried low. They'll come here before nightfall. Both sides, they always do. The girl clutched her sleeve tighter, her voice breaking. I can't go inside. I won't. The rancher crouched in front of her, his voice steady. Then, we stand outside. But you have to tell me what they want with you. What this mark is. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, the echo of hooves rose again from the canyon behind them. Dust lifted on the horizon. Riders, many riders. The stranger's smile twisted. Looks like the time for answers just ran out. The girl's breathing quickened, her body shaking with fear. The rancher rose, his revolver heavy in his hand. His gaze locked on the dust cloud growing larger. The first riders appeared, silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. The scarred man was among them, his face grim and determined, eyes fixed on the outpost like a man chasing destiny. Behind him, his men rode in tight formation, their marks hidden beneath sleeves, their purpose clear, But even as they approached, another line of riders swept in from the opposite side, the silent group who had confronted them in the canyon. They moved like shadows, their numbers doubled now, their leader's gaze burning with quiet fire. Two forces, closing in from either side, the outpost at the center. And caught in between stood the rancher, the girl, and the stranger, the brand. Carved in stone above them, the air grew thick with the weight of what was coming. The rancher could feel it in his bones, the storm he'd been walking toward since the moment he saw that tattoo in Dry Creek. Every path had led here, to this cliff, to this mark, to this girl who carried a burden too heavy for her small frame. Girl clutched his sleeve suddenly, her voice trembling. If they take me inside, it's over. You can't let them. The rancher looked into her eyes, steady and unflinching, though inside his chest his heart thundered like war drums. Then we don't let them. The stranger laughed low, stepping back toward the shadow of the outpost walls. You talk like you've got a choice. But when they clash, when they tear each other apart, you'll see. The mark doesn't belong to her anymore. It never did. It belongs to all of us now. The riders were nearly upon them, their cries sharp, their guns ready, the dust of their approach blotting out the rising sun. The rancher tightened his grip on his revolver, the girl's hand clutching his sleeve like a lifeline, the stranger's smile glinting in the half-light. The ground trembled with the force of hooves. The air burned with the promise of blood. And the outpost walls loomed above them, silent witnesses to a fate that had been etched in stone long before any of them arrived. The riders clashed at the foot of the outpost, their war cries colliding with the thunder of hooves and the sharp crack of rifles. Dust swirled into the air, choking the morning light, while the echoes of gunfire rang off the cliff walls. The rancher stood firm before the girl, his revolver drawn, eyes darting between the two forces tearing into each other. He had seen his share of fights, but never one like this. Both sides were desperate, driven not by land or gold, but by something older, darker, the mark that bound the girl. The stranger leaned against the crumbling wall of the outpost, watching, with a faint smile as chaos unfolded. This is what it always comes to, he said softly, his voice almost drowned by the battle. Blood for the brand. The girl pressed tighter against the rancher's side, trembling. They'll kill each other, all of them, just to take me back. I can't let it happen. You didn't start this, the rancher answered, steadying her with his hand. And you sure as hell aren't the one to end it. That's on them. Yet even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't so simple. The mark wasn't just theirs to fight over. It was carved into her flesh, chained to her life. He looked at the old stone above the outpost entrance where the same circle and slash stared down like an unblinking eye. Whatever this curse meant, it wasn't going to vanish on its own. The scarred leader fought like a man possessed, shouting orders to his men, his voice carrying above the fray. On the other side, the silent riders pushed forward with grim precision, their leader's eyes fixed on the girl even through the haze of dust and smoke. Both groups seemed willing to burn the world just to claim her. The rancher fired when one rider broke away, charging straight toward them. His shot rang true, knocking the man from his horse. Another came, then another, and the rancher's revolver barked again, smoke rising from the barrel. He didn't relish the killing, but there was no room for hesitation now. Through the chaos, the stranger finally moved. He strode toward the outpost entrance, his steps slow, unhurried, like a man walking into a church. The girl cried out, reaching for him. Don't! You can't go in there. He stopped, turning back just long enough to let the sunlight catch his smile. I was always meant to. Then he vanished into the shadows of the stone doorway. The rancher cursed, firing again at an oncoming rider before grabbing the girl's arm. Stay with me, He pulled her toward the side of the outpost, away from the thickest of the fight. Bullets sparked against stone, horses screamed, men shouted, but he forced them both onward, step by step, until they found cover behind a fallen wall. Her breaths came fast, her face pale, her hands shaking as she clutched the mark on her arm. "He'll use it," she whispered. "Whatever waits in there, he'll use me to wake it." The rancher looked at her hard. "Then we don't let him." A sudden silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the restless stamping of horses. Both sides had paused, their leaders pulling their men back. Eyes turned not toward each other now, but toward the outpost entrance, where a low rumble echoed from deep within the stone. The rancher felt the ground shift beneath his boots. The girl gasped, clutching his sleeve. The scarred man and the silent leader both shouted for their men to hold, their voices sharp with fear for the first time. From within the outpost, the stranger's voice carried, booming and strange, as though amplified by the stone itself. "The mark binds more than flesh. It binds time, blood, and land. You thought you carried it, but it carries you." The rancher's grip tightened on his revolver. He had no taste for riddles, no patience for men who toyed with power they barely understood. He looked at the girl. "You trust me?" Her answer came quick, desperate. "With everything I have left. Then we end this together." He pulled her toward the doorway. The riders from both sides shouted, some raising their guns, others too afraid to move. But the rancher and the girl pushed forward. Into the cold shadow of the outpost. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with dust and the faint stench of old smoke. Symbols covered the walls, carved deep into stone, the same jagged circle and slash, repeating again and again until it seemed to close in from every direction. At the far end stood the stranger, hands pressed against a great slab of rock, his body trembling as if channeling some unseen force. The girl cried out, her knees buckling. The mark on her arm burned bright, glowing faintly in the dim light. The rancher caught her before she fell, pulling her close. The stranger turned, eyes wild now, voice ragged. "It was never about her alone. She is the key, yes, but only because she carries what the rest of us could not. She holds the last piece of the chain." The rancher stepped forward, revolver aimed squarely at the stranger's chest. "Let her go." The stranger laughed, broken and bitter. "You think a bullet can end this? This brand was cut into the bones of the earth long before you were born. Kill me, and it won't change what she is." The girl shook her head weakly, tears streaking her dust-stained face. "I don't want to be anything. I just want to be free." Her words cut sharper than any blade. The rancher steadied his aim, his voice iron. "Then freedom's what she get." The moment stretched, silent but for the crackle of stone and the girl's ragged breaths. Then the rancher fired. The shot echoed through the outpost like thunder, the stranger's body slamming back against the stone. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the slab behind him shuddered, cracks splitting across its surface before collapsing in a storm of dust and rubble. The glow in the girl's arm faded, leaving only the scar of the mark. She gasped, trembling, then slowly lifted her sleeve. The brand was still there, but it no longer burned. It looked like an old wound now, healed but never forgotten. The rancher holstered his revolver, his chest rising and falling heavy. Done. Outside, the riders who had been ready to tear each other apart stood in stunned silence as the rumble of the collapse shook the ground beneath them. Some dropped their weapons. Others turned their horses and rode hard into the distance, as though the weight of what they'd seen was too much to bear. The scarred man cursed, his voice breaking, before retreating with the remnants of his men. The silent riders followed, disappearing into the plains like ghosts fading at dawn. The canyon grew quiet again. For the first time since Dry Creek, the Air felt still. The girl looked at the rancher, her eyes wet with relief. It's over? He studied her arm, the faint scar that would never fully fade. Over enough, he said. They'll come looking again, but not for what's gone. They'll be chasing shadows now. She let out a shaky breath, leaning into him. Thank you. He guided her out of the outpost into the pale light of morning. The sun rose slow over the plains, casting long shadows but warming the earth all the same. The dust of battle settled, leaving only silence and the scent of smoke. Back in town, whispers would grow. Folks would talk of the girl with the strange tattoo, the lone rancher who stood against two armies, the outpost that crumbled after years of silence. Some would say it was a curse lifted, others that it was just another fight on the frontier. But for the rancher and the girl, it was simply survival, a chance to step forward into a future no longer chained to the past. As they rode away from the cliffs, the girl turned once to look back, her eyes lingering on the ruins. Then she faced forward, her voice soft but steady. I don't know what tomorrow holds. The rancher tipped his hat low against the sun. None of us do. But tomorrow's better than yesterday, and that's enough. They rode on, the wide prairie opening before them, endless and uncertain, yet free. The mark remained, but no longer as a chain. It was a scar, a reminder, a piece of a story that would fade with time. And for the first time since the dust of Dry Creek settled, the girl smiled, faint but real, as the horizon stretched out in front of them, waiting.